I'm Josh Barrow, host of Left, Right, and Center, KCRW's weekly forum for civilized debate across the political spectrum. Today's news cycle demands more time for deeper analysis, so Left, Right, and Center is now a full hour every week. Subscribe and listen at kcrw.com/LRC.
On To The Point, we try to make sense of the policy debates and the political sideshows on the campaign trail.
You have this kind of asymmetrical warfare coming from a guy who's great at a soundbite, lousy at an answer.
So are you looking for your own billionaire?
No, I don't want my own billionaire. I'm going to raise the vast majority of the money.
Brace yourself, America, for what?
King Trump.
I'm Warren Olney. To The Point has you covered for the 2016 campaign. Find the To The Point podcast on KCRW's iTunes page.
From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. Welcome to The Treatment. I'm pleased to have back as guests my friends, the documentary filmmakers, Randy Barbato and Fenton Bailey. They've been here for their films, well, The Eyes of Tammy Faye, Inside Deep Throat, and Party Monster. Their newest film as documentary filmmakers is Mapplethorpe, Look at the Pictures. And guys, one of the things I really find fascinating about your work is that there's so much about desire. I mean, and I wonder if that's something that kind of attracts you as a storytellers or what?
I think as a story, sex and sexuality is really interesting. And it's something certainly in America or the Western world that we're very shy and bashful and embarrassed about discussing. But, you know, without sex, we wouldn't be here. I mean, there would be no civilization or culture. So we think it's just a tremendously important force that just doesn't really get examined much. In fact, it seems that we can accept a sort of high degree of highly pornographic, saturated society. We can accept that. But the moment you talk about sex and sexuality, people get really freaked out and up in arms. And that doesn't really seem to make sense to us, and because it's just such an interesting, important subject. It's the engine of who we are.
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, particularly right now, the irony of being so sort of bombarded with sexually explicit imagery, and yet it feels like no one even talks about it. So, I mean, Robert Mapplethorpe, you know, even though he, you know, hasn't been alive for over 25 years, in many ways his art resonates now as at least as much, but maybe even more than it did 25 years ago.
I've thought, too, and especially in seeing the film, guys, that one of the things that makes the stuff seem so timeless is that it's black and white. Mm-hmm. Which gives it, and I wonder if you had any sense of how conscious he was of the black and white, giving the photos a really timeless feel.
They definitely do. I mean, it's the black and white, and also I think the symmetry of composition also sort of elevates the whole thing to this sort of classical feeling.
And I think he was very conscious of that. I mean, I think that there's very little left to chance when it comes to his work. I think it's very deliberate, the lighting, the framing, the content. And I do think that the black and white does help give it this classic feel, particularly with the explicit work. It sort of, it takes it from one thing to another, you know?
I suppose, yeah, like the flesh becomes marble. It becomes more sculptural in black and white. And although towards the end of his life he was doing more color with flowers and things, I think he was, certainly when it came to bodies, wanted you to look at the body as a work of art rather than an object to get off on, you know?
But when he's shooting people, he's often shooting people either really dark skinned or really light. So there's that kind of often a glow, almost like silver nitrate photographs in the way some of those things were printed, wasn't there?
Absolutely. And he loved to he loved diffusion and almost like overexposing. So it does have this sort of, you know, Gloria Turner Texas. She glows with this sort of inner beauty. It's extraordinary effect.
What was your first contact with Mapplethorpe? When do you first remember seeing the pictures? Randy, I'll start with you.
Well, we used to live in the East Village in the 80s, so
he was a very public figure.
Yeah. So we were very much aware of him more as a name and a brand. We never really met him, but I do remember going to the Palladium, and there was this big dance club on 14th Street, and there was the Michael Todd Room, and I remember there were some photographs there.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It's funny because Mapplethorpe and Madonna were these two sort of emerging names. They were sort of famous, and you knew they were downtown in New York, but they weren't sort of We never met either of them, right? But they felt very sort of on parallel tracks. They were going places. And in the early 80s, they were already, fairly famous.
Yeah.
Right?
And it was such an exciting time then because it was that time when artists prior to that, just the idea of the struggling artist who gets discovered by chance versus the artist who sort of makes a name for themselves, builds a brand, and, like Mapplethorpe, like Keith Haring, like Madonna. It was this exciting time where all of that was kind of, this transition was happening in New York.
They were in it to make it.
Yeah.
And Basquiat as well. They were all really determined and openly ambitious and openly going places. They weren't making beautiful works, waiting to be discovered. They went after fame and celebrity, not necessarily out of narcissism or vanity, but because they knew that was the currency. That would get their art noticed. Their work would be paid attention to.
It's funny that you mentioned narcissism, Fenton, because I thought that the way that these people you're talking about, who all are these post-Warhol kinds of people, use themselves, and that brand became a kind of narcissism, saying it was okay to make yourself a part of the art. There's almost narcissism as a brand of art.
Yes, narcissism as art rather than some kind of dysfunction, I suppose, really. I suppose in a way it's redefining narcissism. And I think all those people were very prescient because look at the culture we're in today of the sort of Instagram, Facebook. You are the brand.
I think with Mapplethorpe, it was all in service of the art. I think people can get all Judge Judy about it, but the reality is, he was this incredibly, the volume of work that he produced in his short life was unbelievable. And beyond the kind of impact it had, and also beyond the sheer beauty of it, just the role it played in contributing to this transition of photography as something we would never consider fine art.
I think, though, that's the thing that you could say that Warhol did as well. He basically lived a very public life, created a persona that almost didn't connect to him. And I just wondered, in the case of Mapplethorpe, because you guys alluded to the film, that, there wasn't that big a divide between the public Mapplethorpe and the private Mapplethorpe.
Exactly. I think the big difference is like he was pretty much a documentarian, and it was he took everyone on this incredibly intimate journey. So, and his photographs reflect that. There's some obvious commercial work, which, by the way, much of
the portraits
the portraits and some of the flowers, all of which I think is equally beautiful, but that the personal stuff that he did, he put himself out there in this incredibly intimate way that I think not only contributed to the success, but the impact. Not the impact, but just the sort of, I don't know, the connection you get when you look at some of his work.
I think that's right. You connect with his work because it is so personal and intimate and authentic to who he was. And this, I think it's important, at the time, you had the rise of gay liberation, but even in the art world, in spite of the fact that many, many people in the art world were gay, it was quite rare to be out of the closet and completely open. It
was kind of a well-known information inside those circles, but outside that was shocking information to disseminate publicly.
It was a closet as big as the Ritz, or as big as the Chelsea Hotel. And
it's not very bad.
And he was sort of brave in the sense of revealing of himself. And so the work he created is very true. And I think when you look at it, you connect to that. I think it's amazing looking at the exhibitions at LACMA and Getty. You really connect to it in a very personal way. And I can't help but think that's why he's so talked about, 27 years after his death.
It's the treatment. I'm talking to my old friends, Randy Barbato and Fenton Bailey, about their film Mapplethorpe. Look at the pictures. The title, where does that come from?
Well, it took us a long time to come up with the title. It wasn't until the very end, but actually, it was staring right in front of us. It came from Jesse Helms himself when, during the NEA controversy, he was,
And we should say that was because Mapplethorpe was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, and basically a lot of people think that was kind of the end of the NEA.
Yes.
When he was, in effect, prosecuted by Congress.
And it really made him a household name. But when Jesse Helms went to Congress, he actually brought some of Mapplethorpe's work, including Man Polyester Suit, which is a famous photograph of a man with his black phallus coming out of the zipper of a polyester suit. And Jesse Helms waves the photograph around, in Congress saying, look at the pictures, look at the pictures. And, he's obviously expecting everyone to be outraged and disgusted. And so for us, and that's how we start the film, that's the starting point. And we thought, actually, yeah, this is what we're inviting the audience to do, to look at the pictures 25 years later and maybe not be, outraged and disgusted, but really to look at the art, because in many ways his name, his work has been kind of hijacked by Jesse Helms and that scandal. So people think of it as, scandalous work rather than stepping back. I mean, we have over 500 images in the film. So we really tried to kind of deliver on the title.
I guess I think, too, for me, really going back to the designer, because there was this kind of ache in him to be seen. And again, for me, that links the films you guys have done as documentary filmmakers.
It's funny you say that. I agree with that, but I also think there's the gay gene thing that links all of our films. I mean, Tammy wasn't gay, but she is a drag queen, Tammy Faye.
Yeah, and an icon, and after she walked away from organized religion.
Totally. But I think in addition to the desire to be seen, I think it's being an outsider, being the other, being, in his case, gay, which at that time was so different. It really was. And I think that...
Especially when you think about the way that Andy Warhol publicly completely divorced himself from sexuality.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think, I think it was desire, but it was also sort of just being his true, authentic self in a public way that kind of actually surprisingly made him this surprising gay, pioneer in some ways, which he doesn't seem like the likely candidate because of the work he did. But the fact that he lived such an authentic life in such an open way, I think that was more important than necessarily fame.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that thing that sort of links him and all your subject is there's kind of a brazenness in the way they lead their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's that sense of that, and I guess it is a concept of the closet. There's no, if you are gay as we are gay, you realize at some point there's just no point. The closet is not really a good thing, and the idea of being open and visible becomes a kind of virtue. And it is actually a metaphor you can apply to all of life. It's not about gay people only. It's this idea that you have one life, so live it. And I think Mapplethorpe, what we actually ultimately found quite very inspiring about Mapplethorpe, was that he just went for it. He was completely focused on this idea, dedicated to his artistry, and gave everything he had to it. And people have criticized him for, wanting to be famous in some craven way. But as Randy says, it was all in service of the work. And everything he did was in service of the work. And I think maybe in hundreds of years, critics will look back and recognize there's a school of New York artists who were insanely productive in a short period of time and completely dedicated to their work. Okay, a lot of the work was about themselves, whether it's Madonna or Warhol or Basquiat or Haring, but they were completely consumed with what they were doing, to the exclusion of almost everything else. At the time, contemporary photography, wasn't recognized as a fine art, and certainly taking pictures of nude men. I mean, the New York Times wrote a review of an exhibition of male nudity, basically saying, well, male nudes didn't belong in art. Female nude, yes. The male nude, no. So male nudity, photography, being openly gay, these were things that were sort of no-nos, that they were sort of forbidden. I mean, they existed, obviously, but they weren't really owned or spoken about or respected.
We'll take a break. I'm going to keep on my clothes. My guests are the makers of the film, Mapplethorpe. Look at the pictures. Fenton, Bailey, Randy Barbato. The film is also in rotation on HBO. It's a treatment. There's more to come.
Long before podcasts, there were radionovelas. Celestial Blood is the first ever to combine the two. One version in English and another one in Spanish. Listen with your grandma, only from KCRW.
Check out KCRW's music blog for song premieres, music news, performances, and KCRW DJ features. You can keep up to date on all of KCRW's music happenings at kcrw.com/musicblog.
Welcome back. I'm Still Dressed is the treatment my guests are Fenton Bailey and Randy Barbato. The great new film, which is on HBO now, was Mapplethorpe, Look at the Pictures. I guess, though, these people we're talking about, but Mapplethorpe in particular, and some part of them seem to be spoiling for a fight, you know? And that's the thing that, and so looking at the film and seeing all this stuff in toto, I hadn't had that sense of it before, that he wanted to sort of draw this line and then cross it. I mean, there's a need to be transgressive in him, too, which also, again, to me, speaks about appetite and desire.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You're right. And yet, during his life, he often kept aspects of his work separate. So he'd have, you know, portraits and flowers uptown, and then S&M work downtown in different galleries at the same time, knowing what he said in an interview. He said, you know, if you put the sexual work in with the others, it kind of takes everything over. And I think what's
But those flowers are incredibly sexual pictures anyway.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what are flowers other than
organs?
Yes,
exactly.
There you go. Plant genitals. But here's the thing. At the end of his life, the final show, the perfect moment that he curated, he deliberately combined everything. I think he thought, you know, WTF, I don't have long to go. I am going to leave behind this kind of time bomb. And I think he knew that in putting all that work together, it was going to set off a reaction. I'm not sure he anticipated it would be such an explosive reaction, but I think he knew that that was necessary for him to leap over or rise above his contemporaries and really stand the test of time. That kind of scandal, which, let's face it, has cast a very long shadow and in a way prevented us from looking at the work as he intended us to. But now we can, and I think but the mere fact that we care 25 years later is because of that scandal. He was, in other words, I'm saying, I think he authored this whole thing, and it's part of the work. It's part of his artistry. It's not just the pictures. It's not just the fame. It's also the controversy. This is all part of one artwork.
And he does also speak, though, just about in general that art should provoke. Art should, you know, should open your mind. So I think the transgressiveness of a lot of his work, like I think that is part of his belief of the role that art should play. So, you know, he was careful initially to keep some of that work separate from the other work. But I think, you know, some of that more explicit, challenging work, you know, that's why I think we kind of gravitate to a lot of that work because, you know, he says that was his most important work. So I do think he believed that that transgressive work was important in terms of challenging people to look at things they might not ordinarily look at. Like, how do you react to it? That, you know, to him is what art was about.
Because I guess I find myself thinking about, and you guys have a bit of that. If you star in a short documentary about your nipples being pierced, you're basically, and with all that bloodletting, you're basically saying you want people to take note of you.
Well, you know, it's someone came up to us after screening and said, "Do you think Mapplethorpe based his story on Jesus Christ?" And I was like, you know what? Yes, I think he did. I mean, it's funny, nipple piercing, you know, the stigmata on the cross. And it's something about Mapplethorpe's own trajectory, especially his death and really this kind of resurrection that mimics this kind of arc of this ultimate story. And I sort of sometimes think he planned, I do see him as this very knowing author that so little was left to chance. And he kind of knew what, I mean, remember as a student at art school, he would stay up at night stoned, he said, trying to think of what hadn't been done before. Why? Because he needed something that would cut through. What was it he could do that no one else had done before or had dared to do that would make sure he got noticed. And transcended death, because he died very early on and tragically of AIDS. But, I mean, all of us are going to die, and I think he was very focused on making sure that his work transcended mortality. And he succeeded. I mean, let's be honest.
No, he did. Randy, do you think he felt like he was on the clock a little bit? That he had to get a lot of work done in a certain amount of time? Because it is, just looking at that, at the film again, it's a blur of output from that period.
I think at the end he thought he was on the clock. I think early on it was his nature. It's that drive. It's that, I think the desire to be recognized would go back to your original, the desire to be famous, not the desire to, I think he thought he was an artist. I mean, he says so himself from early on, from the beginning.
Which is also a fairly transgressive thing to say during that period, to completely be arrogant about it and not braggadocious, but as a statement of fact.
Yeah, even before he knew what an artist was or did. But you know what? It makes me think also, like, had it all been about vanity, and fame-seeking for its own sake, he wouldn't have documented his death the way he did. It wasn't just the life of the artist that he documented. He didn't shy away from his death either. And in a way that his death of AIDS becomes emblematic and represents the death of so many artists and creative people prematurely during that time. He had the retrospective at the Whitney, and he was there. He was in a wheelchair, emaciated. He had the photograph of himself with the skull cane. He wasn't hiding away, and he really owned it and maintained his philosophy of the life and the death being on display and being the work of art.
Especially at a time when being someone who's suffering from AIDS, doing that publicly was a huge statement to make anyway. And again, transgressive.
Yes.
Yes, totally.
Exactly, yeah.
It's the treatment. We're talking about transgression and hunger with my guests, the directors of the film, Mapplethorpe. Look at the pictures, Randy Barbato and Fenton Bailey. I think, though, the other thing that I find that links these films is they're all, in some way or another, part of the punk ethos of, in effect, scrawling graffiti on popular culture and saying what you think is a certain kind of living is not the way everybody lives, and we shouldn't hide aspects of ourselves.
Most people don't live authentic lives. It's just like we are consumed with sex and sexuality, but we don't even have a conversation about it. Most people live hypocritical lives. And so these people, whether it's Mapplethorpe or Tammy Faye, who come out there and they shake your world a little because it's like, whoa, who is this crazy woman with the eyes who is on the one hand crying about God and the other hand reaching out and hugging, someone with AIDS at a time when it was just crazy to do that, or attacking right-wing Christians. So I don't know. I think that these people who sort of put themselves out there and make you kind of have a double take because there's something uncomfortable making in what they're saying and how they're living their lives are very attractive to us because they're often they're the freaks and we relate to them because that's who we are. And usually it's the freaks who are they're the normal ones. Everyone's, not everyone, but a lot of people spend a lot of time like presenting a false narrative. Mapplethorpe is so attractive because of the real narrative he put out there. In fact, it was during the course of making this film, we went from going like, oh, I'm not sure about him. Like, we were sure about Tammy Faye at the beginning of the film. We were sure about Monica Lewinsky at the beginning of the film. When we made that film, we had a real sense of who these people were. With him, we weren't as sure. But by the end...
But because,
I don't know, we had a little potential judgment, or we just didn't know where we.
I don't think we understood his motivation.
He was said to be kind of a manipulator and a user, and a kind of self-centeredness and lack of generosity is something that makes him depart from the other people you guys are profiling.
And people can say that and judge him for that, but he never pretended otherwise. He said what attracted him to Sam was that he was very good looking. And he had the money. It wasn't just that Mapplethorpe was using someone who didn't know they were being used. it was a true collaboration where everybody knew what was going on. Sam knew what was going on. Mapplethorpe knew what was going on. It was a brilliant collaboration. So where's the shame in that? And I think we just ended up feeling so filled with admiration for his bravery and his honesty in the face of what might be negative judgments from other people.
But by the way, it wasn't just a true collaboration. It was love, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, love isn't what, like, people...
But there are a lot of people who said that, I mean, and even now, I remember coming out of the documentary Sundance, people going, I don't know, I don't think that he loved him. He was using him. So even now, people are still kind of put by that.
I think that's fine. I mean, you know, that's people like to judge, but he did say he loved him, and then he talked about the nature of their relationship. Again, it goes back to this idea of people sort of living lives that thinking love is this, thinking ambition is that, not being honest about how kind of complex relationships really are, how complex human nature really is. I mean, you know, Bill and Hillary, I'm sorry, but like, he could maybe fool around with a different person every month, and maybe they still have true love. I mean, you know, who are we to say what they're trying to find what love means to them? I mean, you know, we live in a world filled with Judge Judys.
Just not all of them have shows. But I think what's...
or want to be president.
Exactly. But that's interesting, you guys, but basically asking questions yourselves about this in the way that you said you felt sureness about the other subjects. But this time around, I mean, because that legacy of his is still something that kind of haunts him, isn't it? That idea perhaps he was somebody who was sort of plowed through the art scene in New York and left behind a lot of human collateral.
Well, hopefully, in watching the film, you know, hopefully you see both sides of it, and that he was this, you know, we'd like to say the singular artist and serial collaborator, because really he worked with a lot of people, but I think they were truly collaborations, you know, mutual exchanges. I really do think, and there were many of them, and they were all very important to him, from Patti Smith to Sam Wagstaff to Michael Stout, his lawyer, with whom he set up the foundation. I think, you know...
And I think he was very generous and loving in all those relationships.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's generosity?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think he, you know, absolutely had loving, genuine, deep relationships with lots of people. So I think you can be ambitious, and especially when your ambition is serving your art, and be genuine and loving and all that. I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. I mean, I think it's easier to sort of separate them out. It's hard for people to understand that people are complicated, and that's normal.
But you know also what's interesting about what we're talking about is that we're focused a lot on his character and personality, and I think this in a way proves Mapplethorpe's point that it's not just the work that you hang on the wall, it is the life also, and that you cannot have one without the other, and that these two things do combine to create this ultimate sort of work, and that it is the work you hang on the wall and the work you create doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's also the sort of narrative and the personal story is kind of a crucial part of that too. I mean, I think that's true of other artists like Warhol, and I know it would be certainly Madonna. I mean, there's no question she's a great artist.
Well, some people would question,
especially
after last week's Prince performance, but...
And on that note, we're going to bring this to a close. I'm going to thank my guests, Randy Barbato and Fenton Bailey. The new film, the great HBO film, is on HBO in rotation now, is Mapplethorpe Like the Pictures. There's also a show still running at the LA County Museum of Arts. Thanks for coming in and doing this. Thank you a lot.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Recording engineer who also mixes the show is Kat Yours, edited by Blake White, who's the associate producer. I'm going to go look at the pictures. It's The Treatment. To catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.